I want to tell you about a cattle mutilation case that we worked on in southern Colorado in 1974. This particular case included the presence of an actual dead body. Now, this case started out as a single mutilated cow case, but after the second night grew to include 3 mutilated cows, 1 live cow with a grotesque gash across its abdomen, the corpse of a teenage boy who had been missing for 6 months, and 3 separate sightings of bizarre lights in the sky. So I want to go through this story chronologically and talk about the things that happened that still mystify me to this day. On the night of May 26, 1974, Sheriff Tex James of Costilla County, Colorado, received a phone call stating that a rancher named Carlos Vigil had discovered the mutilated corpse of one of his cows. This particular mutilation was more extensive than most. The entire anus and rectum had been cleanly removed, and anal sphincter muscles had been meticulously sliced away from the surrounding areas. The rest of the rectum was pulled out and then neatly folded and placed next to the carcass. Also removed was the uterus and the spleen, both of which were not even placed next to the body. Of course, the cow's hide had been removed, but there was no blood and little evidence of struggle, and the carcass itself was extremely well preserved, all things considered. The next morning, Tex returned to the scene. He was joined by State Patrolman Jim Wagner and myself. We photographed the carcass and searched for clues. We found none. There were no hoof prints, tire tracks, or any other signs of human or animal intrusion except for the body of the cow. A few days later, another cow was found mutilated in the same pasture. The mutilations were similar, although not as extensive. The genital area and rectum were removed. By this time, the Colorado State pathologist, Dr. James Barnes, had determined that the cow had died from massive blood loss from the abdominal wounds. But that was to be expected. On June 10, 1974, a third cow was found mutilated in the same pasture. Once again, the rectal and genital areas were removed, and once again the carcass was extraordinarily well preserved. At this point, Sheriff James called for assistance from outside agencies. Agent Larry Mikesell and I arrived from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. By now, ranchers in the area were becoming quite upset, and rightfully so. You can imagine finding 1 cow mutilated, but 3 mutilations within a short period of time in the same pasture was really unnerving. On June 13, 1974, I was dispatched to the area to conduct interviews and determine if there was any connection to previous mutilation cases that had occurred in eastern Colorado. As it turned out, many of the ranchers in the area had heard of my involvement in other cases and had questions they wanted answered. Many of these people were intelligent, articulate individuals. They loved their land and their animals and were justifiably upset at what was happening. On June 14, 1974, another bizarre incident occurred in the same pasture. Mrs. Jimmy Vigil, wife of Carlos Vigil, went out to the pasture to look for her husband. Carlos had not returned home the evening before and was overdue. She found the body of her husband lying in the grass. Someone had obviously dragged the body there and left it exposed. There was a small amount of blood on the body, and nothing had been removed from the body except his shoes. An autopsy indicated that Mr. Vigil had died from exposure after being severely beaten. We suspect that he had wandered into the pasture after having become lost while hiking in the San Juan National Forest west of Antonito, Colorado. His shoes indicate that he had been hiking, not driving. Apparently, Mr. Vigil had suffered some sort of head injury and lapsed into unconsciousness. He was never seen again until his body was found. In addition to the obvious homicide, there was something else. We found a strange light green substance on Mr. Vigil's body and clothing. This substance seemed to resemble exotic butters or lubricants used in industry. Further analysis of this material revealed that it contained some trace elements that were consistent with lubricant materials that are known to be resistant to most solvents, including gasoline, oil, paint thinner, lacquer thinner, alcohol, and water. None of the ranchers in the area recognized the material. During the early morning hours of June 15, 1974, Agents Mikesell and I were conducting interviews when we heard a radio transmission from the sheriff stating that a motorist had reported seeing a bright light in the sky that was moving erratically. Later that same morning, one of the ranchers, Mr. Henry Ashworth, called us and stated that he had witnessed a large, bright object moving erratically in the sky. He said that the object was descending slowly and then suddenly rose rapidly into the air and moved eastbound out of sight. He estimated the altitude of the descending portion of the flight at between 50 and 100 feet. And he said that the object was hovering intermittently during the descent. Mr. Mikesell and I proceeded to the scene where Mr. Ashworth had observed the strange aerial phenomenon. We staked out a position near the roadway where Mr. Ashworth said that he had been standing. We hoped to catch another glimpse of whatever it was that he had seen. We observed a bright star-like object that began to descend slowly behind some trees. We watched intently as the object maneuvered around the tree line. It descended to a very low altitude, then abruptly ascended to a higher altitude and disappeared into the darkness. Although we could not see the object, we could hear a distinct humming noise that seemed to emanate from the direction of the object. As the night wore on, we made numerous observations of similar objects, some of which approached within 50 feet of our observation point. One of these objects emitted a brilliant white light momentarily, then disappeared. On one occasion, an object passed directly over our position and emitted a pulse of light along with a loud hum. We observed similar objects in the sky on other nights during the course of our investigation. All of the objects that we saw were star-like in appearance, brightly illuminated, and each of them seemed to be capable of erratic and rapid maneuverability. Each of the objects possessed the ability to hover. At least one of these objects actually landed in an open field about 2 miles from our observation post. On one occasion, I drove to within 100 yards of the object and observed it at a distance of 50 yards. It appeared to be about 8 feet in diameter, resting on 3 legs. It emitted an eerie green glow and was emitting a constant humming noise. I stopped my vehicle and exited with my shotgun. The object rose rapidly into the air and disappeared into the darkness. I did not fire at the object because of the possibility that it might explode or disintegrate. On another occasion, while driving along a lonely stretch of highway, I observed an object directly in front of my headlights. The object was approximately 12 feet in length and resembled a long, narrow cigar shape. It seemed to be metallic and was emitting a faint green glow. The object continued to move forward slowly and did not seem to be affected by my high beams. On June 1974, Mr. Mikesell and I concluded our investigation and submitted a report to the Attorney General's office. That report contains a detailed description of all of the incidents that we investigated. Our conclusions at that time were that the mutilations were committed by unknown persons, and that the mutilations and the death of Carlos Vigil were probably not related. Although the mutilation investigation yielded no conclusive results, the investigation into the possible UFO aspect did yield some interesting information. During the course of our investigation, we learned that the local residents had observed similar objects in the sky dating back to the mid-1950s. We also learned that the U.S. Forest Service periodically receives reports of weird-looking vehicles and strange lights in the remote areas of the national forest west of Antonito. Furthermore, local residents had reported a series of explosions that had occurred late at night in the same area where we had staked out. These explosions had been heard during the early 1950s, the late 1960s, and again in 1974. We were unable to verify these reports. In the early 1970s, the Atomic Energy Commission, now the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, operated a research reactor near Antonito, Colorado. We interviewed officials from the NRC who informed us that they had no knowledge of any explosions occurring at the site. They further informed us that the nearest nuclear reactor to Antonito is located near Alamosa, Colorado, about 100 miles to the north. To date, the mutilation remains unsolved. The UFO aspects were never explained. And one thing that continues to baffle me about the case is the absence of any evidence. There were no weapons, tools, footprints, tire tracks, hair, fibers, glass, paint chips, blood, or anything else that could have provided a clue as to the perpetrators. Another baffling aspect of the case was the rectal areas and genital areas that were removed from the cows. Why would someone remove these specific parts? To this day, I don't know of any anatomical area that could be surgically removed without leaving a noticeable scar. The rectum, however, leaves no scar. If the animal is never examined after the surgery, even a horse or a cow will never notice the difference. This seems like a very obscure thing to remove, especially when the more obvious parts like the eyes, ears, nose, and tongue were left in place. And finally, why did these people or entities feel the need to drag the body of Mr. Vigil into the pasture and lay it out there? What purpose would this serve? I honestly believe that if we had a clear explanation of one of these mutilation cases, it would clear up a lot of questions that remain unanswered in other cases. But to this day, I still ask myself, what happened in Costilla County, Colorado in the summer of 1974? Thank you.